The era marked by the emergence of popular politics in the 1820s and the presidency of Andrew Jackson is often called the Age of the Common Man or the era of Jacksonian democracy. The changing politics of the Jacksonian years paralleled complex social and economic changes. Visitors to the United States in the 1830s were amazed by the informal manners and democratic attitudes of Americans. In hotels under the American plan, men and women from all classes ate together at common tables. They rode together on stagecoaches, steamboats, and later in railroad cars. European visitors could not distinguish between classes in the United States. Men of all backgrounds wore simple dark trousers and jackets, while less well-to-do women emulated the fanciful and confining styles illustrated in wide circulation women's magazines. Equality was becoming the governing principle of American society. Among the white majority in American society, people shared a belief in the principles of equality. More precisely, equality of opportunity for white males. These beliefs ignored the oppression of enslaved African Americans, of course, and discrimination against free blacks. Equality of opportunity would, at least in theory, allow a young man of humble origins to rise as far as his natural talent and industry would take him. The hero of the age was the self-made man. There was no equivalent belief in the self-made woman, but by the end of the 1840s, feminists would take up the theme of equal rights and insist that it should be applied to both women and men. Between 1824 and 1840, politics moved out of the fine homes of rich Southern planters and Northern merchants who had dominated government in past eras and into middle and lower class homes. Several factors contributed to the spread of democracy, including new suffrage laws, changes in political parties and campaigns, improved education, and increases in newspaper circulation. Western states newly admitted to the Union, Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri, adopted state constitutions that allowed all white males to vote and hold office. These newer constitutions omitted any religious or property qualifications for voting. Most eastern states soon followed suit, eliminating such restrictions. As a result, throughout the country, all white males could vote regardless of their social class or religion. Voting for president rose from about 350,000 in 1824 to more than 2.4 million in 1840, a nearly seven-fold increase in just 16 years, mostly as a result of changes in voting laws. In addition, political offices could be held by people in the lower and middle ranks of society. In the past, candidates for office had commonly been nominated either by state legislatures or by king caucuses, a closed-door meeting of a political party's leaders in Congress. Common citizens had no opportunity to participate. In the 1830s, however, caucuses were replaced by nominating conventions. Party politicians and voters would gather in a large meeting hall to nominate the party's candidates. The anti-Masonic Party was the first to hold such a nominating convention. This method was more open to popular participation, hence more democratic. In the presidential election of 1832, only South Carolina used the old system in which the state legislatures chose the electors for president. All other states had adopted the more democratic method of allowing the voters to choose a state's slate of presidential electors. The popular election of presidential electors and, in effect, the president had important consequences for the two-party system. Campaigns for president now had to be conducted on a national scale. To organize these campaigns, candidates needed large political parties. While only the large national parties, the Democrats and the Whigs in this case, could hope to win the presidency, other political parties also emerged. The Anti-Masonic Party, as we mentioned before, and the Workmen's Party, for example, reached out to groups of people who previously had shown little interest in politics. The anti-Masons attacked the secret societies of Masons and accused them of belonging to a privileged anti-democratic elite. During the Jacksonian era, a much larger number of state and local officials were elected to office, instead of being appointed as in the past. This change gave the voters more voice in their government and also tended to increase their interest in participating in elections. Candidates for office directed their campaigns to the interest and prejudice of the common people. Politics also became a form of local entertainment. Campaigns of the 1830s and 1840s featured parades of floats and marching bands and large rallies in which voters were treated to free food and drink. The negative side to this new campaign technique was that in appealing to the masses, candidates would often resort to personal attacks and ignore the issues. A politician, for example, might attack an opponent's aristocratic airs and make him seem unfriendly to the common man. Winning government jobs became the lifeblood of party organizations. At the national level, President Jackson believed in appointing people to federal jobs, such as postmaster or what have you, strictly according to whether they had actively campaigned for the Democratic Party. Any previous holder of the office who was not a Democrat was fired and replaced with a local Democrat. This practice of dispensing government jobs in return for party loyalty was called the spoil system because of a comment that in a war, victors seize the spoils or wealth of the defeated. In addition, Jackson believed in the system of rotation in office. By limiting a person to one term in office, he could then appoint some other deserving Democrat in his place. Jackson defended the replacement and rotation of office holders as a democratic reform. No man, he said, has any more intrinsic claim to office than another. But the spoil system and the rotation of office holders affirmed the democratic ideal that one man was as good as another, and the ordinary Americans were capable of holding any government office. These beliefs also helped build a strong two-party system. As we know, John Quincy Adams wins the election of 1824 through the corrupt bargain, angering the Jacksonian Democrats. Adams further alienated the followers of Jackson when he asked Congress for money for internal improvements, aid to manufacturing, and even a national university. Jacksonians viewed all of these measures as a waste of money and a violation of the Constitution. Most significantly, in 1828, Congress patched together a new tariff law which generally satisfied northern manufacturers but alienated southern planters. Southerners denounced it as a tariff of abominations. Adams sought re-election in 1828, but the Jacksonians were now ready to use the discontent of Southerners and Westerners and the new campaign tactics of party organization to sweep Old Hickory, who was Jackson, into office. Going beyond parades and barbecues, Jackson's party resorted to smearing the president and accusing Adams's wife of being born out of wedlock. Supporters of Adams retaliated in kind, accusing Jackson's wife of adultery. The mudslinging campaign attracted a lot of interest and voter turnout soared. Jackson won handily, carrying every state west of the Appalachians. His reputation as a war hero, a man of the western frontier, accounted for his victory more than the positions he took on issues of the day. Jackson was a different kind of president from any of his predecessors. A strong leader, he was not only dominated politics for 8 years, but also became a symbol of the emerging working class and middle class, the so-called common man. Born in a frontier cabin, Jackson gained fame as an Indian fighter and as hero of the Battle of New Orleans, and came to live in a fine mansion in Tennessee as a wealthy planter and slave owner. But he never lost the rough manners of the frontier. He chewed tobacco, fought several duels, and displayed a violent temper. Jackson was the first president since Washington to be without a college education. In a phrase, he could be described as an extraordinary ordinary man. This self-made man and living legend drew support from every social group and every section of the country. Jackson presented himself as the representative of all the people and the protector of the common man against abuses of power by the rich and the privileged. He was a frugal Jeffersonian who opposed increasing federal spending and the national debt. Jackson interpreted the powers of Congress narrowly and therefore vetoed more bills, 12 to be exact, than all 6 presiding presidents combined. For example, he vetoed the use of federal money to construct the Maysville Road because it would only be built in one state, Kentucky, and it was the home state of Jackson's rival, Henry Clay. Jackson's closest advisors were a group known as his kitchen cabinet, who did not belong to his official cabinet. Because of them, the appointed cabinet was less influential on policy than under earlier presidents. The champion of the common man also went to the aid of the common woman, at least in the case of Peggy O'Neill Eaton, the wife of Jackson's Secretary of War. She was the target of malicious gossip by other cabinet wives, such as Jackson's recently deceased wife had been in the 1828 campaign. When Jackson tried to force the cabinet wives to accept Peggy Eaton socially, most of the cabinet resigned. This controversy contributed to the resignation of Jackson's vice president, John C. Calhoun, a year later. For remaining loyal during this crisis, Martin Van Buren of New York was chosen as vice president for Jackson's second term. Jackson's concept of democracy did not extend to American Indians. Jackson sympathized with land-hungry citizens who were impatient to take over land held by American Indians. Jackson thought the most humane solution was to compel the American Indians to leave their traditional homelands and resettle west of the Mississippi. In 1830, he signed into law the Indian Removal Act, which forced the resettlement of many thousands of American Indians. By 1835, most eastern tribes had reluctantly compiled and moved west. The Bureau of Indian Affairs was created in 1836 to assist the resettlement of tribes. Most politicians supported a policy of Indian removal. Georgia and other states passed laws requiring the Cherokees to migrate to the west. When the Cherokees challenged Georgia in the courts, the Supreme Court ruled in Cherokee Nation versus Georgia in 1831 that Cherokees were not a foreign nation with the right to sue in a federal court. But in a second case, Worcester versus Georgia in 1832, the High Court ruled that the laws of Georgia had no force within Cherokee territory. In this clash between a state's law and the federal courts, Jackson sided with the states. The court was powerless to enforce its decision without the president's support. Most Cherokees refused to accept the settlement of 1835, which provided land in the Indian Territory. In 1838, after Jackson had left office, the U.S. Army forced 15,000 Cherokees to leave Georgia. The hardship on the Trail of Tears westward caused the deaths of 4,000 Cherokees. Jackson favored states' rights, but not disunion. In 1828, the South Carolina legislature declared the increased tariff of 1828, the so-called Tariff of Abominations, to be unconstitutional. In doing so, it affirmed a theory advanced by Jackson's first vice president, John C. Calhoun. According to this nullification theory, each state had the right to decide whether to obey a federal law or to declare it null and void. In 1830, Daniel Webster of Massachusetts debated Robert Hayne of South Carolina on the nature of the federal union under the Constitution. Webster attacked the idea that any state could defy or leave the Union. Following this famous Webster-Hayne debate, President Jackson declared his own position in a toast he presented at a political dinner. "Our federal union," he declared, "it must be preserved." Calhoun responded immediately with another toast: "The Union next to our liberties most dear." In 1832, Calhoun, South Carolina, increased tension by holding a special convention to nullify both the hated 1828 tariff and a new tariff in 1832. The convention passed a resolution forbidding the collection of tariffs within the state. Jackson reacted decisively. He told the Secretary of War to prepare for military action. He persuaded Congress to pass a force bill, giving him authority to act against South Carolina. Jackson also issued a proclamation to the people of South Carolina, stating that nullification and disunion were treason. But federal troops did not march into this crisis. Jackson opened the door for compromise by suggesting that Congress lower the tariff. South Carolina postponed nullification and later formally rescinded it after Congress enacted a new tariff along the lines suggested by the president. Jackson's strong defense of federal authority forced the militant advocates of states' rights to retreat. On another issue, however, militant Southerners had Jackson's support. The president shared Southerners' alarm about the growing anti-slavery movement in the North. He used his executive power to stop anti-slavery literature from being sent through the U.S. mail. Southern Jacksonians trusted that Jackson would not extend democracy to African Americans. Another major issue of Jackson's presidency concerned the rechartering of the Bank of the United States. The bank and its branches, although privately owned, received federal deposits and attempted to serve a public purpose by cushioning the ups and downs of the national economy. The bank's president, Nicholas Biddle, managed it effectively. Biddle's arrogance, however, contributed to the suspicion that the bank abused its powers and served the interest of only the wealthy. Jackson shared this suspicion. He believed that the Bank of the United States was unconstitutional. Henry Clay, Jackson's chief political opponent, favored the bank. In 1832, an election year, Clay decided to challenge Jackson on the bank issue by persuading a majority in Congress to pass a bank charter bill. Jackson promptly vetoed this bill, denouncing it as a private monopoly and enriched the wealthy and foreigners at the expense of the common people and the hydra of corruption, as he said. The voters agreed with Jackson. Jackson won re-election with more than 3/4 of the electoral vote. The one-party system that had characterized Monroe's presidency in the era of good feelings had given way to a two-party system under Jackson. Supporters of Jackson were known as Democrats, while supporters of his leading rival, Henry Clay, were called Whigs. The Democratic Party harked back to the old Republican Party of Jefferson and the Whig Party resembled the defunct Federalist Party of Hamilton. At the same time, the new parties reflected the changed conditions of the Jacksonian era. Democrats and Whigs alike were challenged to respond to the relentless westward expansion of the nation and the emergence of an industrial economy. As you can see here, this is a comparison between what was important to the Democrats and what was important to the Whigs. After winning re-election in 1832, Jackson moved to destroy the Bank of the United States. Jackson attacked the bank by withdrawing all federal funds. Aided by Secretary of the Treasury Roger Taney, he transferred the funds to various state banks, which Jackson's critics called pet banks. As a result of both Jackson's financial policies and feverish speculation in Western lands, prices for land and various goods became badly inflated. Jackson hoped to check the inflationary trend by issuing a presidential order known as the Specie Circular. It required that all future purchases of federal lands be made in specie, meaning gold and silver, rather than in paper banknotes. Soon after, banknotes lost their value and land sales plummeted. Right after Jackson left office, a financial crisis, the Panic of 1837, plunged the nation's economy into a depression. Now, keeping with Jackson's legacy, before leaving office, he had one famous quote. And he said, "I have only two regrets. I didn't shoot Henry Clay, and I didn't hang John C. Calhoun." So even though he fought Native Americans in the Indian Wars, the British in the War of 1812, and saw casualties to his many duels, he still had the regret that more people did not die under his tenure. Something to think about. Okay, so for the essential question, what caused the Panic of 1837? What were the consequences felt by the nation and Jackson's successor?